Fortnite solo cash cups have gone from giving out $7,000 for first to $100. But what's particularly strange is the total amount of money given away per week across all cash cups. You'll probably think the first cash cups were these pop-up cups from mid-chapter 1, but their prize was a pin. So yeah, these aren't cash cups. Maybe Winter Royale or some of the skirmishes, but I'm putting these more in the major tournament category, even though they're basically not. The first tournaments I'd consider cash cups were held at the end of Chapter 1 Season 8, the Scallywag, Blackheart, and Lux Cups. These events were used as test events for the upcoming World Cup qualifiers, and all three of them had 2 rounds, with the top 1500 qualifying for the finals in the duo events, and the top 3000 qualifying in the solos. Clearly, these were thresholds that Epic Games was happy with, as they decided to stick with them for the World Cup qualifiers. Of course, in these events, they also experimented with pricing and distribution. In EU, the Blackheart Solo Cup had money all the way down to 120, with 40,000 total up for grabs. The duo events were much tighter, with pricing being given out at top 25 and 30 duos respectively, clearly testing different formats. It's very interesting to look back at these leaderboards as you see a ton of names of players who have been on top since day one, and a lot who have sadly left the pro scene. Around this time, the announcement of Mongrel and Micho duoing was incredibly hyped by the entire community, and the fact that they won both round 1 and round 2 of the first event that they played together, the Lux Cup, amplified the hype around them going into World Cup immensely. The remainder of the season and the majority of Chapter 1 Season 9 was filled with World Cup qualifiers and finals, but amongst this was 2 very random tournaments. For the 2-week lead up to the Fortnite World Cup finals, the first tournaments that were actually labeled cash cups became playable. Oddly, these were trio cash cups. This was strange since this was only the second time trios as a game mode was ever introduced into Fortnite, and it was only previously available on a 1-day cup and never available in pubs or arena at this time. Given the proximity to the World Cup finals that were in New York, a lot of the international players were already in NA, meaning this leaderboard gave us an odd glimpse into what the best teams in each region could do against each other. Unsurprisingly, Booga was at the top, winning 4 of the 8 games. Mongrel, Benchy Fishy, and Mr. Savage, the original MMB, was in 9th. OCE's Volks, Slayer, and Parpy ended in 14th. 20th was Sean H. Sucks, Clusia, and Thomas HD, and down in 48 was Asia's Hood J, Peter Pan, and Arius. For their first place finish, Animal, Aspect, and Booga took home a total of $15,000, so $5,000 each. But what was really insane is that if you placed 150th in Europe, each player in your trio would earn $500. Across all regions, the total prize pool for this 2-day event was $1,200,000, 200 more than the FNCS Invitational in 2022, the premier event that year. Clearly, these cups were a tester for the next season, as the main game mode would be trios, but it was an interesting peek into what international Fortnite looked like just before the World Cup. With the World Cup over, the entire community was hyped about competitive Fortnite. Players had just seen the, at the time, largest, biggest prize pool in esports history, and everyone was ready to grind for the next one. To completely ruin all of that momentum, Fortnite followed this up with Season X. This was the first season that actually had a structured cash cup system. Wednesday had the Contender Solo Cash Cup, Thursday had the Champions Solo Cash Cup, and then Friday had a Champions Trio Cash Cup to match the FNCS game mode, being trios. This is actually where I had my best Solo Cash Cup placement of all time, a 78th in the Contender Cup and a 149th in the Champions. You notice something seems a little different to the modern cash cups though. 15 games played. That's because these solo cash cups were actually 4 hours long with a 15-game match cap, which was a true test of players' mentality. To accompany the noob-friendly mechs, 0 build zones, and that one POI that turned you into a toilet when you crouched, they added a Contenders Rank solo cash cup. Unlike many decisions this season, this was actually a really good idea, as many more players had access to the tournaments, which matched the increased interest in competitive Fortnite following the World Cup. Unfortunately, no one talks about that because of the mechs. At this time, Epic Games had set the bar extremely high for competitive Fortnite. The World Cup had a $30 million prize pool with another $10 million in the qualifiers, and they just announced the first FNCS, the Fortnite Champion Series, with a $10 million prize pool. So naturally, the cash cups were a bit bananas. First place in the Contender Solo Cash Cup won $2,500. First place in the Champions Cash Cup won $7,000, and first in the Trio Cash Cup won $18,000, so $6,000 for each player on the team. Each week, Epic Games were giving away just over $320,000 from cash cups alone. This was really the first time where the world got to see the dominance of some of the Russian players, with the likes of Kiriachi winning 3 of the 14 solo cash cups and only placing outside of the top 10 in another 3, earning a total of $22,550. In trios, Mongrel, Mitro and Benji, or the second version of MMB, would go on to win 2 of these cash cups, placing 2nd and 9th in the other 2, earning the trio a combined $52,500. As would come to happen a lot in the future seasons, the cash cups had a good insight into what teams would be good in the major tournaments of that season, as Kiriachi's trio would later go on to heavily derail MMB's almost perfect FNCS run in the grand finals. That theme would continue into the next chapter, as Chapter 2 Season 1 was one of the most notorious cash cup seasons of all time. The Champions Solo Cash Cup was switched out for a Platform Solo Cash Cup, where 3 tournaments ran simultaneously, one for PC, one for console, and one for mobile. The Contender Cash Cup remained, and for some reason they removed the Team Mode Cash Cup, which for this season was squads. Instead, they had a Friday Fortnite event where you could win a banner or something. I don't know, really cared. But this is where things got weird. You see, the season started on the 15th of October, with FNCS starting 2 weeks later on the 2nd of November and ending on the 8th of December. But the odd thing was that the season didn't actually end until the 20th of February, 2.5 months later. This meant that for 2 months, all players did was play clicks, box fights, and solo cash cups. Had the revenue sharing for creative maps been enabled back then, I truly wonder how much money this map would have made in this time, because it was all that players were playing. On EU, we had Benji Fishy dominating the solo cash cups while streaming. He won 2 and across the season took home a total of $26,600 from solos alone. His controller counterpart, Unknown Army, was doing a similar thing on the NA East region, winning 4 solo cash cups and taking home a total of $15,100 across this season. It was less earnings than Benji, but that was just due to NA's smaller prize pool. I'm fairly certain he was the reason that Legacy Aim Assist was completely reworked and eventually nerfed. His aim and piece control were so far ahead of the time, even if there were many accusations of him using a Zen device to cheat many years later. This was a moment in Fortnite competitive history that honestly you just had to be there for. Watching Benji Fishy or Unknown Army stream in their prime was truly a spectacle. There haven't been many moments similar to this in Fortnite's lifespan, but on a Wednesday or Thursday you felt compelled to watch these streams or you'd be missing out. Each week Epic Games were giving out $165,500 through solo cash cups when combining all regions prizing, but I think on the 3rd week they made some minor clerical error. The total prize pool changed from $165,500 a week to $615,000 a week. The inflated prize pools meant that rather than the top 100 players making earnings, the top 250 players on EU would earn, with the first place still taking home $7,000. Now, I would love to have a conversation with someone from Epic Games' competitive marketing team about this season, because they also had a $15 million Winter Royale that they randomly decided to add another $8 million of prizing to, because a lot of people played Duo Arena. Combine this with the FNCS prize pool, and in Chapter 2 Season 1, Epic Games gave away somewhere close to $31.5 million in tournament prizes. I know Epic Games is one of the most successful companies in the world, and they have the cash, but I genuinely would love to sit down and interview someone from Epic about the thought process at the time. So hey, if you're, listening, hit me up, because I have to figure out what was going on at this moment. Obviously, as a player, this undoubtedly was amazing, as you had so many ways to make cash, and of course, yeah boy came home $200 richer from console Winter Royale, but clearly giving away this amount of money was in no way sustainable for really any company. The expectations of the community were set to unrealistic heights that would inevitably become a problem later on. Towards the end of Season 1, there was a 1-month break without any cash cups, and people did start to get restless. For competitive players, there just wasn't that much to grind in Fortnite without tournaments, so people began getting bored. When Chapter 2 Season 2 dropped, people were expecting that to change, but there was just radio silence from the Twitter accounts. Thankfully, during this time we had a good LAN, DreamHack Anaheim, and this tournament, but eventually, after a month of no tournaments, FN Competitive dropped this tweet: "Shit's laggy, no tournaments." I mean, that's roughly what it said. It took until March of 2022, 2 months after the last solo cash cup of Season 1, before the servers were fixed and another cash cup was hosted. The side effects of this massive break were actually quite interesting. Since players were predominantly playing creative, the mechanical skill barrier increased at a rate that we've never seen before. But not only that, since players didn't know what game mode the next FNCS was, they were just practicing for the solo cash cups, meaning that players' individual skills also skyrocketed. In short, players got significantly better better, fast. And since the world entered lockdown this season, that meant that going forward, they could play more than ever. I actually believe this is one of the reasons why we saw a ton of OG players quit around this time as they started to fall behind. With players stuck at home, Epic capitalized on this opportunity with a scattergun approach. Give them as many tournaments as humanly possible. They had 2 different days for cash cups. Wednesday, which was the duo cash cup, as this was the main game mode for FNCS, and Thursday they continued with the solo platform cash cup, which was split into PC, console, and mobile, each with their own individual prize pools. But this is where they did something rather interesting. Rather than just having solo cash cups and duo cash cups, they themed them after the season. Now this season was a spy or agent theme, so you could choose whichever team you were on, Shadow or Ghost, by playing that version of the cash cup that ran side by side. Now, given the solo cash cup had 3 platforms already playing at the same time, and now there was 2 different versions of that exact same cash cup to play, it would appear that this was an attempt to lower the player counts of each tournament and split them more evenly and give lower level players a chance to place high. But what ended up happening was if you played bad in one, say in Ghost, you just switched to Shadow and restarted with lower elo lobbies and dropped a high elim game. It only took 1 week of these running at the same time before Epic realized that maybe running 6 cash cups at the same time probably isn't the best idea, and for the next 4 weeks decided to stagger them so that they didn't overlap. Yeah, this was the first and last time these cash cups were ever themed around the season. Not only did they have multiple variations of the cash cups, but they also introduced a beloved tournament type, the Daily Cup. These ran throughout the afternoon, which was doable since most people around the world were still stuck at home. Now, the prize pool may seem minimal, only giving out $750 to the duo who won each day, but you gotta remember there was 7 regions split for PC and then mobile and console, and they were hosted every day. So it actually added up to around $73,500 a week, which came out to $388,500 across the entire season. Similar to Season 1, Season 2 was long as it was extended for around a month, and Epic Games used this time to experiment with 2-round cash cups. Since there were only 100 players that qualified to round 2, or 1 set lobby each week, this was actually the first time that players got access to tournaments that replicated in FNCS Grand Finals, with the same players loading into every single match, which is what we call a set lobby. For some reason, this was only done in the solo cash cups, as the 2-round duo cash cups had 200 teams or 400 players instead, presumably testing both formats to see which worked better. After this season, the idea of a set lobby tournament wouldn't return for another year and a half. They also added the first iterations of the community tournaments, which were the Benchy Fishy, Mr. Savage, Lachlan, and Amar Cups. These had around a $10,000 prize pool each and were local to the player's respective region. The interesting thing here is that creators had relative freedom as what they wanted to do with the rules of the event, so some of these were trios and some of them were solos, some of them were duos, which gave good variety to the season. Despite the insane quantity of tournaments, the community was still upset. The prize for winning a solo cash cup was still very high, but Epic decided to sharply cut off the remainder of the prize pool, with only the top 10 earning. Players were used to top 250 and top 100 earning, so this was a drastic change for non-tier 1 pros who had been cashing out the previous 2 seasons. But don't get it twisted. This is still a really good prize pool that players today would die for, but expectations were just set too high. This also caused feuds between the different platforms, as PC players were frustrated that console had their own version of the tournaments with the same prize pools and felt that their money was being stolen by worse players, and the console players fought back with the argument that there was a larger console player base and that they deserved equal and if not more opportunities to earn. Epic Games would take many steps in the coming years to police both sides, but for the moment kept platform-specific events relatively untouched going into the next season, Chapter 2, Season 3. On the surface of things, daily cash cups and solo platform cash cups remained pretty similar to the previous season, but when you take a closer look, there was actually a massive difference in the daily cup prizings. These changed from duos to trios, and prizing changed from first getting $750 as a team to first getting $1,200 as a team. However, they also added some prizing for second and third. When you take into account the 7 regions and the platform split, the pricing jumped from $73,500 a week to $151,200 a week. When comparing seasons, Season 2's Daily Cup gave out $388,500 in total, but Season 3's was over double that at $982,800. On top of that, Epic would add a new rule to tournaments, the elimination cap. For all cash cups, this was set to 20, so you wouldn't gain any points for your 21st, 22nd, 23rd, and so on eliminations. If you look through the leaderboard, you'll see this really did not stop people from playing aggressively, as almost every team topping the leaderboard would still drop 40 plus elim games to start their tournament. It became increasingly obvious that Epic Games wanted to provide tournaments to a lower level of players with a contender entry requirement, but with pros running through lobbies that had this level of player in it, it wasn't exactly a good experience for the new competitive players, and it wasn't really that competitive for tier 1 pros either. To attempt to fix this, they had 2 tournaments running simultaneously. One regular Trio Cash Cup with an entry requirement of Champions rank, and one for Contenders level player in Arena, that if you placed high enough in, you would qualify for the higher level Champions one without actually having to play Arena to get there. A really good idea, but there was also small prizing for first and second, which predominantly was won by players in Champs just smurfing on alt accounts. With the world beginning to open up again in August, less players were at home 24/7, resulting in less players playing during the day. So unfortunately, Season 3 would be the last season that hosted daily Cash Cups, as Chapter 2 Season 4 would, to everyone's disappointment, remove these forever. Honestly, I'm saddened that these have never returned, and I'm sure more people would hop on every single day to play these, even if first was just $100. To make things worse, Epic Games' lawsuit with Apple resulted in Apple users no longer being able to download updated versions of Fortnite, and they ended up getting stuck in the previous season, Chapter 2 Season 3. This lowered the player count on mobile devices drastically, so much so that the mobile part of the platform Cash Cups was removed, only leaving console and PC. RIP mobile. To get more players into competitive Fortnite, Epic hosted an experimental Wild Wednesday, a tournament that rotated LTM game modes each week. This was another one of those odd tournaments that I thought was actually quite a good idea at the time, and it fit the Fortnite landscape very well, but after this season never came back. I mean, it did return, but without a prize pool, and those tournaments are kind of rubbish, and they're also not cash cups for the sake of this video. Nonetheless, this season did mark a pivotal change in Epic Games' philosophy towards how cash cups were viewed. As you may have been able to tell, there's been a large focus on solos, with other team mode cash cups in the week having a lower total prize pool. But Season 4 was the start of a dynamic switch where the main team mode cash cup became more of a priority, with prizes being taken away from the solo side to be put into the team mode one, which in this case was trios. The overall cash cup pricing actually increased by 10%, however the removal of 150k from the daily cups really hurt the overall. This was the start of a large focus on a consistent competitive system, something that the scene had completely been missing. Each season, players didn't even know what their tournaments would be, what the prizing was like, or most importantly of all, what the game mode would be. Coming into the second half of Chapter 2 in 2021, this is where Epic committed an entire year of the main game mode to being trios and a large focus onto FNCS. In the announcement blog, they stated that the total prize pool for the year was increasing from $17 million in 2020 to $20 million in 2021. Given there seemed to be a negative trend downwards in the direction of Fortnite competitive in the eyes of many players, this was a glimmering light of hope that things were improving and that prize pools were on the way up. But what people didn't realize was that Cash Cup prize pools per week were reduced by 52%. Winning a solo Cash Cup on EU went from $3,000 down to $750. Winning a Trios Cash Cup went from $4,000 per player to $767. Not only that, the platform Cash Cups were removed entirely, with all events being cross-platform. Despite the fact that the players merged together, the prizings from both didn't. The response from the community was very doom and gloom. For the past 2 years, prizes in competitive Fortnite had been on a steady decline, and since the community was predominantly younger, filled with teenagers, they didn't mainly see it as prize pools reducing to a much more sustainable level. They saw it as Epic Games investing less and less money into the competitive scene. Now, that wasn't untrue, but the prizing of the Cash Cups at the start of Chapter 2 were never sustainable. These prize pools remained reasonably consistent for the entire year of 2021, from Chapter 2 Season 5 all the way up to the completion of Chapter 2 Season 8. Despite the massive drops in Cash Cup prizing, the consistency of 2021 was a great step forward in creating a sustainable competitive Fortnite ecosystem. Consistent, repetitive tournaments with the same format year-round were something that the space desperately needed. There was, however, some interesting additional Cash Cups added throughout this year. Season 7 saw the addition of everyone's favourite tournament, Booga's Late Game. This was a new game mode that had 60 players spawn into the third zone with a custom throwback loot pool. If you get 10 elims, you turn into the new Booga Icon series skin, an incredibly smart and creative way to promo the new Icon series outfit in-game. This was undoubtedly the most beloved game mode Fortnite ever had, and I have definitely played less since its removal. This event and the Arena game mode were so successful that they added a few quick cups of this later on in Season 8, but unfortunately had no prizing. To fit the hole that was left in the console community with the removal of platform-specific Cash Cups, PlayStation collaborated with Epic Games to host the PlayStation-only tournaments in Chapter 2 Season 7, which would later on become a seasonal event. Unfortunately, Xbox only got one exclusive event back in 2019, and I'm guessing they spent their entire marketing budget on it since it had a $1 million prize pool, and then they decided it wasn't worth it and they were never going to host the event again. Season 7 and Season 8 also added the Cash Cup Extra hosted by DreamHack, which you would qualify for by placing in the top 33 teams of the Trio Cash Cup, and you would also be able to earn from both of these. This was a set lobby tournament, which, if you remember correctly, Fortnite had just completely abandoned for the last year and a half. Thankfully, it seemed like the DreamHack Cash Cup Extras were a test that Epic Games were happy with, as going into Chapter 3, all solo and duo Cash Cups became 2 rounds. You see, the problem with a fully open Cash Cup is that there is a bit of RNG involved in winning. Since you're match made with players around your points level, your first game can really have anyone in it. The top pros and players who are winning Cash Cups are significantly better than the average player. As we've said a couple times, they can drop 30 or 40 elimination games. But the problem is this depends on how many other good players are in your lobby. If there's other pros, both teams will be as aggressive as possible, meaning they take away potential elims from your team. And since there's no elim cap anymore, the RNG of just getting a good lobby isn't a good way to determine who wins a Cash Cup. The difference between first and second could be 1 elim worth of points, and again, that could be determined by how bad your first lobby was. Similar to the year prior, these tournaments didn't change much going forward. Through Season 1, 2, and 3, the prize pool stayed relatively similar to the previous year. However, due to the success of the PlayStation Cups alongside the Console Champions Cup, Epic did add a console solo Cash Cup for 1 season. These ran alongside solo Cash Cups, and every player who placed inside the top 10 across all regions earned $200 each. These didn't make it past Chapter 3 Season 3, and Epic never made any comment why, but it was most likely due to the insane level of teaming that happens in console cups. With the huge success of the Zero Build game mode released this season, Epic Games had to test this format and see if it would work for competitive events too. So the first Zero Build Trio Cash Cups were added to the game with a small prize pool. Had the prize pool been large and the game mode not fit for competition, then this money would have just been wasted, so it was a good decision on Epic's part to keep the prize pool minimal. Casuals and pros alike found that Zero Build events were fun and definitely could be competitive, so going forward, these would continue to be a staple of the weekly event schedule. The final season of Chapter 3, Epic would get experimental. Since there was no online FNCS this season, as the FNCS Invitational was being held in Raleigh, North Carolina, Epic were free to experiment with whatever their Cash Cup system looked like. They took an approach that completely revamped the weekly layout. Rather than Cash Cups, we had Divisional Cups, which had Contender, Challenger, and Elite levels. These ran kind of like a hybrid of a ranked mode and Cash Cups, where you could be promoted to a higher tier for placing better, and the top players from Elite could play in the Elite Weekly Cup for big amounts of cash. Overall, the weekly prize pool was increased by 78% from the previous season, which sounds great. However, this season the prize pools were split much more evenly, with smaller regions getting a much larger split than they ever had before. The Zero Build Cash Cups had exactly the same prize pool for every region, which, since players could play as many regions as they liked, and the fact that Zero Build isn't actually that ping dependent, made this prize split kinda make sense. But a weird consequence of this is that the best NA East Zero Build team was Queasy, Thomas HD, and Anas, a European team playing on 100 ping, who won 11 out of the 18 rounds of this and placed second in 3 more. Epic Games seemed relatively happy with this Elite Cup and Zero Build weekly structure that they decided to keep it going forward into the first season of Chapter 4. They did, for whatever reason, change the Zero Build Cash Cup from trios to squads, but after numerous attempts to make the late game cup successful, these were unfortunately cancelled this season. It's unsurprising given how bad the server performance was, but I'd personally love to see a season with consistent late game cups back, especially as it removes a lot of the common issues that players have with solo Cash Cups. So in its place, these tournaments reverted to a 2-round solo Cash Cup with a twist, the first Victory Cash Cups. This was a 2-round tournament where the players who qualified for the second round would play 3 hours of solo Cash Cup matches, and for every win they would win $100. This became a bit of a competition between Tier 1 pros to see how many wins they could get, with Marco winning 4 of 7 games in week 3, which held strong for 3 weeks until Relvis was able to win 4. The final 2 weeks of the season would be finally topped with Malabuka and Swizzy both managing to win 5 games. There was actually so much hype in this performance that Malabuka's stream peaked at over 20,000 concurrent viewers during this time. Seeing the hype for this style of tournament in Chapter 4 Season 2 and 3, Epic would continue forward with focusing on this style of tournament. However, one issue with the Victory style Cash Cups was just the time it took. The week was already filled with a large amount of tournaments, so running 2 3-hour tournament rounds on the same day was difficult. Epic decided to shorten the first round down to 2 hours and the second round down to 1 hour, with players being limited to 3 games each, so they could basically win a maximum of $300. This would have resulted in a massive amount of cash being removed from the weekly prize pools, since the tournament now had 1/3 of the games to win. However, to combat this, Epic opened up the amount of players players who would qualify for round 2, resulting in roughly the same amount of games being run in this tournament window. This actually increased the amount of total cash given away per week considerably, which, since the cash was more widely distributed, meant that a large number of players were able to earn, giving more motivation for mid-level players to get into competitive. To add to this, the Zero Build Cash Cups was also changed to a Victory Cash Cup as well. However, this overlapped with the Solo Cash Cup, meaning players would have to choose one or the other. This wouldn't be so bad if players could play multiple regions, but Epic also decided to region lock each specific tournament for the season, meaning whatever region you played in your first Solo Cash Cup or Zero Build Cash Cup, that was the region you were stuck with for the entire season. Only being locked to playing one tournament a day and reducing the length of multi-round tournaments made it seem like Epic was trying to reduce the hours of tournaments that players were able to play each day, and it probably wasn't a coincidence that at this exact same time a lawsuit had just been filed against them for making Fortnite as addicting as possible to kids. Reading into this lawsuit, it seems like this is basically just a case of bad parenting, as it boils down to my kid is addicted to this game, but it wouldn't be a surprise if Epic Games were just being cautious regarding this region lock, especially remembering that a few months prior they just had to pay $520 million in fines and charges for an old item shop design. The result of this region lock was really that players just played the Solo Cash Cup on their main local region and then the Zero Build Cash Cup on a different region, or they just created a second account to play the same Cash Cup in a different region. But the main issue with Victory style Cash Cups is, well, hackers started to focus on playing them, and almost every Zero Build Cash Cup finals has been plagued with them ever since. In a regular tournament, if you die to a hacker, this is frustrating, but at least you might still gain points for the match you played in. But for a Victory Cash Cup, if you ain't first, you're last, and you just waste your time. Players on smaller regions have died in 2 of 3 of their games to hackers, wasting a lot of their day and making this tournament kind of frustrating. Personally, I'd rather just have open Cash Cups rather than Victory Cash Cups for Zero Build. This season, Epic also scrapped the divisional Cash Cup system and added back just a traditional 2-round style Cash Cup with a similarly wide cash spread. You may be seeing the trend with this season though, wide accessibility to earnings for mid-level players, with top-level players making less in a Cash Cup. Winning a Solo Cash Cup at the start of Chapter 2 would earn you $7,000. In this season, you need to win 70 Solo Cash Cup games in order to win that same amount. But this seems to be an approach that Epic Games is comfortable with. Cash Cups allow mid-level players to compete and have a chance at earnings, and bring in much more new players into the competitive scene as they have a chance to win some money, and FNCS is for the top-level players where they can earn the big bucks. I think this is the most sustainable approach to tournaments for the long run, and Epic Games appears to think this as well, since in Chapter 4 Season 4, the current season, the layout and prizing for the Cash Cups is exactly the same as the previous 2 seasons. However, FNCS has also increased its prize pool by $2 million, so you'd think people would be happy, but you'd be wrong. The $4 million FNCS is only accessible to players who've already qualified across the last 3 seasons to the Global Championships, so the majority of the community are upset that they are left with the Cash Cup prize pools for the entire season, and having the same prize pool across all the regions doesn't really make any sense. The reality of the situation is that these prize pools are not bad. There's no other esport in the world that has this volume of secondary tournaments open for anyone to play. In a large amount of esports, players would have to not only travel, but pay for their own travel and accommodation to just compete. Cash Cups are practice tournaments that you can earn from. Sure, I would love these prize pools to return from early Chapter 2, but they were never sustainable and set a terrible precedent that players deserved massive earnings from winning relatively low-level tournaments. If players really want to earn the big bucks, they have to be able to compete at the highest level and perform in FNCS.